You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 19. Today I'll be talking to Caitlin McCormack. Alright, so my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. If this is your first time listening, Art Affairs is meant to give you a look at and into the new contemporary art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, shining a spotlight on the human side of the wonderful work they do. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, and you can check out new episodes on all your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to subscribe. And you can always connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is fiber artist Caitlin McCormack. I think it was either Jeremy Hush, who I had on the show back in episode 2, or Jess from Blood Milk, who originally introduced me to Caitlin's work. And since then, I've absolutely fallen in love with it. She's probably most well known for the skeletal sculptures she makes using crocheted cotton string and glue. But she started out in a very different way, making very different art. We talk about her early 3D illustration work on the show, as well as the transition from that into the style of work she's making today, her desire to inject more humor into her pieces, her exploration into more colorful work, and a whole lot more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Caitlin McCormack. Kate, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you on. I'm a big fan.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
All right, so let's start with where everything started for you, which I believe is in Plainfield, New Jersey, which interestingly is where George Clinton grew up. Fun fact.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've also read that you grew up in the woods. So was that in Plainfield, or did you move somewhere else after you were born?
Even though the name Plainfield sounds like it would be a rural area, it's a small city. But there was a really tiny hospital there called Muhlenberg that I don't even know if it's there anymore. But that's where I was born. But I was raised, by artist parents in a tiny little cabin on a relative's property in the middle of the woods in a town that wasn't too far from there. Which was pretty rural when I was growing up. So I spent all my time in the woods. It's since become very built up. There's just these mega mansions, developments, with the tiny little trees that haven't grown yet, which is really weird contrasted but with the woods that I spent a lot of time in. The thing people always say is that they name the developments after whatever was there before they cut all the trees down.
Oh, that's sort of depressing in a way.
Yeah. This is going to be really depressing, this whole thing. I'm sorry to break it to you, but...
And I've heard you refer to yourself on more than one occasion as having been a feral child, which I think is very visceral. I'm picturing Lord of the Flies, headband and hatchet, running around in the woods. Was that what your childhood was, effectively?
Yeah. A lot of inexplicable hole digging and running out of the woods with handfuls of worms and chasing deer and rabbits. Yeah, I was by myself all the time. And my parents, they never discouraged me from being an expressive weird little kid. They kind of raised me in this bubble where I wasn't aware of social norms, and entering the public school system was a very harsh awakening because it, didn't really mesh with my understanding of the world at that time.
You mentioned that your parents were artists. What kind of art were they making?
They both work in a bunch of different media. My mother works with collage. She has a sort of a similar approach to material that I do. I mean, I probably, my own approach probably is derived from her own, because she let me use a lot of her materials when I was a kid, and she collects things from sources that are near and dear to her, and pieces of garments that have some sort of significance in the context of her life. And she does these collages where she applies materials and then paints over them with oil. And she uses, magazine clippings. And sometimes she's done some work with photocopy distortion, Xerox distortion, which was really strange for me because my mom is defiantly anti-technology. And it was just really strange that to see her use a Xerox machine, even though that's not new technology, she refuses to use anything, that is not totally analog. So, I mean, I'm not smart enough to know if a Xerox is even that technologically advanced. I obviously am very similar to my mom. And my dad is a sculptor and a painter. He makes guitars that look like brains.
Oh, wow.
Or he made a guitar that looked like an M16. He's very anti-gun, but he does all kinds of things. He did performance art in the late 1970s. He was a musician.
And your grandparents were also very artistic as well, right? Didn't your grandfather carve wooden birds?
Yeah. My grandfather worked for the USPS, and I think he had he fought in World War II, and then he had that job, and I think he was pretty burnt out, and he started making these wooden birds from kits that you would send away for, I think, when he retired. I don't really know what the timeline of that looked like, but I know it was way before I was born, or at least a little bit. And the birds were beautiful. He carved them with knives, and he used a pyrograph tool to burn. The basement smelled amazing. Like, it smelled like burning cedar and all different kinds of wood. And yeah, it was really great. And then he would paint them. They look real. I have a bunch of them, and they're kind of like scattered throughout the homes of everyone in my family.
Oh, that's amazing. And then obviously your grandmother did crochet work, which is where you learned it from. How old were you when you learned that from her?
I was about 4.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
I would, my parents could, we were really super low income. We did not have any money at all. And, my parents couldn't afford a babysitter. So if they ever had to do something, I just spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And, instead of buying toys, I sort of had to make objects for myself. And my grandmother took it upon herself to teach me how to crochet, because you could, that's a skill that'll really carry you through your whole life if it fits into your mindset. She was really strict, but I'm glad that I was taught by her, because I think I learned it the right way.
And so then, was it your family's various creative pursuits that sparked your own interest in the arts, just being exposed to it all the time? I
can't say that wasn't 100% the cause. That had to be it. I don't know if it was an intrinsic quality. As soon as I emerged from the womb, I probably was like a really useless nugget slug person before my parents were like, make something out of this. I was always drawn to using my hands and pretending. I don't think I had a choice really with the upbringing I had.
So then, at what point did it become something, not just something that you were doing for fun, but something you actually wanted to go to school for and actually make a career of? When did you start taking it seriously?
That's an interesting question. I think because I grew up in a real low-income setting, my parents encouraged me to be enterprising when I had the urge to behave that way. When kids are 9, they start to realize oh, I could sell this thing, or I could have a lemonade stand, or I could I could make money beyond, like, I never got allowance. I just did stuff around the house because I had to. And like, I think, I remember like making little poetry books. I guess now you would call them zines, and selling them with little drawings and things. And, when I was a kid, I was like, I would be really cool to make a living out of this. But I saw my parents struggle a lot in the art community and not make a living. Not that has nothing to do with the quality of their work, but it's just, the 1980s and 90s, it was so competitive, and it's even more so now. But yeah, I think, all throughout my life, I was like, this is probably what I'm going to do. I am so aimless in all other aspects. Like, I have no idea. I have an existential crisis every day at a minimum about like, what am I going to do when I can't do this anymore? Because I'm, very insecure.
I mean, was that distracting to you? I mean, balancing that thought of, marketing my skills or making money versus just doing what you love,
Yeah. The two things feel so disparate. And like, I mean, they're obviously tethered to each other in a really profound way, but the mindsets that you need to balance seem for me personally just from two ends of the spectrum. And it is kind of a mind fuck to combine them in a way that's sustainable, if that makes any sense.
No, for sure. Yeah. So then you ultimately went to school at University of the Arts in Philly, where you live now. Were you and your family like living in Philly at that point, or did you move to Philly just to go to school?
I had never been to Philadelphia before in my entire life. I was going to go to Pratt. And I was accepted, and I was all set to go there. And I went to this, pre-orientation picnic. I was going to study film at Pratt, cause I love film. And I just felt very disconnected to the community there for some reason. I think, it probably was my massive, all-consuming inferiority complex that just took hold and was like, you don't deserve to be here or something. Because everybody was like this little genius sitting in this campus, this oasis. There were guys in chef's hats carrying out big silver platters of food, and I was just like, this is too good for me. But I think I took a little break from like applying to schools for like a month, and then I applied to UArts, and they gave me so much money. And the reason I applied there was because the Quay brothers had gone, and I have idolized them since I was an adolescent. And I was like, I don't need to go to Philadelphia to know that this is the place for me, because these people that I've looked up to for so long were, they went to this school. And that's the reason I'm still here.
Well, and your main focus going in was illustration. And, when you were first entering school, what kind of art were you interested in making?
I originally was going to go to UArts for film. And I took a bunch of film courses. And I had this freshman 3D sculpture teacher named Larry Donahue, who, God, I loved him. He was terrifying the first day, but man, he's so inspiring. And at a certain point, you were supposed to choose between taking a class that was more on like a film tech kind of track, or to continue taking sculpture courses, tactile media. And I was like, I'm a sculptor. That's what I want to do. And that's what really determined my course, I think, in terms of school. And the reason that I pursued illustration was because I liked that the UArts curriculum offered a really well-rounded assortment of courses in drawing and painting and conceptualization, and also like web design and things like that. I thought it would be practical. I also love illustration. I always have.
So was your shift into illustration also when you started working in these 3D illustrations, or did you do more traditional 2D illustration first?
At UArts, you're kind of encouraged to, I think in most, at that time, and maybe, in the years leading up to that time, you were kind of, it was understood that if you're in school, you're gonna work in the medium that your teacher is working in. You're supposed, there's like a level of mimicry until you get it right and you develop your own voice. So I tried painting, I tried 2D illustration methods, and I could do it. I got good grades, but it was really unfulfilling for me. And then I realized, like, holy shit, I could be building little maquettes and photographing them. That's why I'm here. Like, it's like it clicked for me. It was like, this is a one single frame from a stop motion film that's posited as a illustration. And putting it at that context made me feel like so shitty, because it was like, oh, I'm just doing one single still frame from a stop motion film, and stop motion animators do literally hundreds of thousands of these. Who do I even think I am?
No, but those are amazing. Do these, these scenes that you're building, did you write or like imagine stories around them? Because they're just so rich.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. A lot of them were, they kind of had vague narratives. A lot of them are based on Kafka's Zorro aphorisms, which was my Bible at the time. I love Kafka. I idolize Kafka. I thought that the aphorisms were really good prompts for these illustrations because they're so vague yet visually rich. And I think that maybe using them to help develop my voice in terms of communicating a narrative was like a very helpful transition into fine art because of that obscurity and the vagueness and the way that you could kind of hold back some of the information without explicitly communicating everything, which is what you're supposed to do with an illustration. You're supposed to cleverly communicate things as effectively as possible. And I don't know if that's necessarily who I am.
Did you ever have a chance to exhibit these works?
Yeah. I've displayed the original sculptures and the prints, like, high quality prints of them. I think I showed them at the Sundance Channel headquarters in New York a couple years ago. And I've shown them at Arch Enemy Arts in Philly. And actually, the first art shows I had in Philadelphia were with prints and original sculptures from that body of work. So it was like a real heavy segue into exhibiting art and partaking in the fine art world.
Very cool. So college age Caitlin, what was your career goal at that point? Like, what were you wanting to do with the illustration degree you were working towards?
I don't know. I am so, my approach to goals is so fucked up and, self-sabotaging, and like I basically adhere myself to whatever I think is the least likely thing I'll get. And that becomes my goal because I want to feel bad for not being able to get it. I think that's like this theme throughout my life.
But then when you get it, like, you're a hero.
When I get it, it doesn't matter to me anymore. That's what happens. I get the thing sometimes. I don't always get the thing. A lot of lately, I'm trying to pivot my career into a exhibition art paradigm that is a little bit more fulfilling for me. Like galleries that have a more diverse roster, because that is very important to me. And galleries that put on shows, that facilitate shows that are conceptually more intriguing. I really want to pivot into that arena, and it's hard, and there's a lot of rejection. But then still, when I get the thing I want, it's like, oh, they lowered their standards to accept you. That's what happens every time. It's a constant, cyclical, repeating, broken record.
So you ultimately got your degree in 2010. Considering that you're quite a bit removed from illustration now, do you ever wish that you'd focused on sculpture or something differently in school, or was that all just part of the journey?
I respect the journey, and I salute the journey. I'm into it. I'm into the journey, the trajectory. I don't like I don't like reflecting on things other people have done, but I mean, I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm very inarticulate right now because you're like one of 6 people I've spoken to in the past 10 years. I really do respect the way that things developed. I don't take responsibility for it. I think it's just like it's environmental, ambient qualities of my life that contributed to that. But I do wish that I had pursued fibers, I think. But I don't know if it necessarily would have been fulfilling for me because, especially at UArts, there's at the time, I think there was a heavy emphasis on craft in the fibers department. And I don't know if I necessarily would have benefited from that because what I do is kind of a mangled approach to craft anyway. I had a professor named Chrissy Day who taught this experimental costume and performance class, which was in the crafts department. I took that as an illustrator, and that was another life-changing, pivoting moment for me. You know, I learned how to create a wearable fine art object with a clearly communicated narrative.
Wow.
Which is communicated as a performance instead of as an illustration. And that was like, she changed my life. Chrissy Day changed my life. She's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. And she's an incredible artist.
Does she still teach there?
She teaches at MICA, I think. But I can't be quoted on that. She's definitely still a teacher. And that's like a gift to the world. Seriously.
Yeah, that's amazing. So once you graduated, did you stay in Philly or did you move away and then come back?
I stayed here. My senior year of college, I moved to this amazing house in what is called the Eraser Hood. So it's north. It's north of Chinatown in Philadelphia, and it's where David Lynch was living when he went to PAFA.
Okay.
It's right near PAFA, and it's this industrial kind of wasteland. Now it's being built up, but when I lived there, it was just these like massive landscapes of the skeletons of factories and the Reading Viaduct and telephone lines and pigeons. It was like these vistas were amazing. I loved living there so much. It was so cool. And my landlord, whose name is Ross Mitchell, is actually someone that I'm still in communication with today. He's in the arts in Philly, and he's actually been really supportive to me. So I really couldn't. How could I leave Philly when that was where I had positioned myself? You know, before and after graduating, I just, it was hard. I couldn't justify leaving the situation because I loved it so much.
Well, and there seems like, and this is from, outside looking in, there definitely seems to be like a very strong community there. That was something I was really talking to Jeremy about several episodes ago. There's Jeremy and Sophie and everything that they do with the convent. And then there's Jess and the whole Blood Milk gang there.
Yeah.
There seems to be a really strong, tight-knit community. What do you think it is about the art scene there that has established that sort of community vibe?
I mean, it's a small city. You run into people a lot, everybody has dated someone else that someone else, dated. It's very incestuous, but I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily true for anyone but me, but I think that the proximity to New York really, is what creates that tight-knit community, because there's this like inferiority complex and like a underdog kind of syndrome. When you're in Philadelphia and you're so close to this like huge, perpetually celebrated part of the art world in New York and Brooklyn. I think people in Philly feel like they really need to support each other to exist at all in the shadow of that. And when I say the shadow of that, I don't mean to demonize it. Like there's so much art in New York that I am just like totally obsessed with and couldn't exist without. But it is hard to, it's like being the next door neighbor of the coolest kid in school and you're just like a big dork, but not that Philly's not a big dork. Philly is like secretly very cool.
So what kind of work were you doing like right out of college? Did you have like day jobs just to keep, the lights on?
I worked at a mid-century modern furniture store. I was the only employee. And because I was the only employee, I couldn't take breaks, so I couldn't pee.
So did you work like every day they were opened?
I worked there 4 days and then 5 days a week. And I just sat there like desperately having to pee until I could leave or till my shift was over and then I could lock the door and finally pee. It was like, it was this time of just having to pee so bad. But no one ever came in. Oh, sorry. What were you going to say?
No. It's just amazing that was the most memorable part of it.
Yeah. It was like very overpowering, but it was a great job because no one ever came in there. And I could just watch Breaking Bad on my computer and make comics. I was making some comics at that time. I think trying to teach myself some new stuff on Photoshop after graduating. Just doing simple drawings and editing photos of my 3D illustrations. I did that. I was just able to work on my own stuff. Like, I don't care if my ex-boss hears this. He was a dick. So yeah, that's what I did there.
Right on. So not too long after graduating, your artistic focus shifted considerably in a much different direction, more into the style of what you're making today. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that transition. And it seems like the catalyst for that, was the passing of both of your grandparents, which was shortly right after you graduated. And I believe that you've said that you used crocheting as sort of a way to work through your grief. Was that because it was meditative, or was it that connection with your grandmother since she's the one that taught you?
It was both. It was both. And so my grandmother had really terrible dementia, and my grandfather passed away first, and then she was living alone in the house, and she forgot that he had passed away like every 10 minutes to half an hour, and she would wake up looking for him, and someone had to be there to remind her. And she was like, I saw her on several occasions going through the process of contending with grief of losing her husband over and over and over again. So that was, obviously traumatic for her, but it was also very stressful and devastating for everyone in my family. And my belief is that subconsciously I was engaging in this meditative process of crochet, because it kind of it reflected or it paralleled her repetitive process. I really do think that that was part of my willingness to adhere to crochet at that time. And I was also trying to make, I think because my grandfather made those birds, and eventually when my grandmother passed away, it was like a couple days before my birthday in January. He died around Thanksgiving. I started to use glue to stiffen the crocheted material I was making because it kind of reminded me of bone under a microscope. Like bone tissue is very lace-like and beautiful and spongy and intricate. So I think I was trying to make like a synthesis of his birds with her crocheted materials as like a totem or like a weird homage to, who they had been in my life. It was just probably all part of my, grieving process and my inability to be very expressive on a surface level about my sadness.
Well, and were you thinking of these as actual like works of art at first, or were they just things that you were making, for yourself to process your grief?
They were just objects for me at first. Yeah, they were just things that I wanted to hold in my hands. Yeah, that was I think that I needed to have a repetitive haptic thing to attach myself to.
Okay. And so at that point, did you shift entirely from the art that you were making before, or were you still working on the 3D illustrations as well?
I think because I got a new job at a retail store, and I know that when I worked there, I was doing both of those things. So I think I was splitting my time between the 3D illustrations because I still thought that maybe I could pitch these things to an art director. No art director should ever get an email from me. I would never wish that on anyone. Jesus. But yeah, then I was also kind of silently working on the crocheted stuff. It still felt a little too personal to even share, but I was making it.
Okay. And we'll dive deeper into your process in a bit, but there's one aspect of it that I wanted to touch on, which is the fact that, when you first start out with these, you tend to view osteological specimens, but then only briefly. Most of what you do after that is for memory, and it's very intentional, which I think is especially brilliant. You decided very early on that you weren't going to make, scientific, anatomically correct skeletons. It was more this separation of abstraction, I guess, of your own memory, and how they diverged from reality was meant to sort of reflect the malleability and fragility of memory. Is that, am I understanding that right? Was that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
And not only were you building this into your process, but these themes around memory were themes that you incorporate into your shows and even your individual pieces. So what is it about that concept that interests you so much, that it's become such a big component of your work?
From the time I was an adolescent, early teens, I was really interested in pseudoscience and any kind of like philosophy that presented itself as with an authoritative tone, like pataphysics, the elevated context of metaphysics that, can't fully be understood. It's impossible to grasp, and once you grasp it, it dissolves before your eyes. I've been obsessed with pataphysics for as long as I can remember, and other, adjacent pseudosciences. So something about taking memory and using this like sort of scientifically derived object to contain it or communicate it in a very unreliable sense, but like positing it as this like specimen, this hard science specimen that when you have to get really close to it to unveil the total bullshit and fabrication. It's all like kind of a big joke. I really do, like, I want things to be funny. A lot of my work really makes me laugh a lot, but it's also really, really sad, and it's about trauma and PTSD and loss. So it's kind of like a weird dichotomy in the work. It's a strange, like, two very disparate sensibilities pulling it at the same subject matter. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, for sure. And mention, trauma, loss, grief. Those are all themes that sort of, played a big role in the work over the years. And these are extremely heavy feelings and hard to process. Clearly, it's incredibly personal work. Do you feel that it's difficult for you to open up and expose yourself in that way? Or is that sort of a relief and it's an outlet for you?
Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard. I like the malleability of the intent behind my work, because sometimes I can make something that is so heavily obscured by multiple veils of conceptual cowardice. and then I can make stuff that is very forthright with its, acknowledgement of my feelings. I'm trying to be a little more explicit with that, as I move forward in my career, quote unquote career. But yeah, it kind of changes. It depends on how I'm feeling. Sometimes I'm very candid, and sometimes I'm really, this one's for me. This one's on. You need to play the game for a little longer before you can unlock this one. I'm the one playing the game. No one else is playing the game. It's just me. It's insane.
So early on, you mentioned that these were pretty much things that you were just making for yourself, and they weren't really intended to share. But at some point, you became ready to share them with the world. And I believe one of your earliest gallery relationships was with Paradigm Gallery there in Philly. How did you first connect with those guys, and I guess prepare yourself to share these with the world?
So, because Philly is a small art community, you get the sense when you are in school that there are certain galleries that are kind of like offshoots of certain programs. Like certain galleries show a lot of Tyler students. Certain galleries have a huge community of PAFA students that go to them. And it's, it reflects the different aesthetic sensibilities of each school and, the kinds of people that go there. There's just all kinds of factors. And Paradigm had a real, because Sarah and Jason went to UArts, they had a real strong UArts concentration. So I went to a lot of their shows because, my friends were there. I knew the names of the people on the wall, the people whose art was on the wall. The people weren't on the wall. That would be a real weird show. But yeah, I spent a lot of time there. And I got to know them, and then eventually, Sarah and Jason reached out about doing a 2-person show with Jason. And I was, totally thrilled. I was like, someone's offering to give me a show. Like, this is, I am a notorious self-loathing, sad sack piece of garbage. And I couldn't believe that anybody would want to show my work, especially when I had just like deviated from the thing that I have my bachelor's degree in. It was just totally self-taught. It was really amazing of them to take a chance on me like that.
Well, and you've done several shows with them since, and I think they officially like represent you. So what does that mean exactly? Like, what does the modern form of gallery representation look like?
I think it's actually, it changes constantly, but they bring artists that they represent to art fairs, not exclusively, but they kind of have your back. You agree to show consistently with them. I don't really know what the exact definition of my relationship is with them now, but I know I have one, and they're definitely expanding their roster of artists a lot, and they're showing people from, they had such a huge Philadelphia concentration for so long, and now they're showing people from all over the world because they can, and that's awesome. They have this, immensely diverse group of people who show work with them. And I am, very happy to be part of that community. It's really cool.
Awesome. Yeah, they definitely seem to fit into the strong community we were talking about earlier. And I think I saw that they're actually opening back up. Like, did you see that?
Yeah, they're, I think like doing like extremely minimal, groups of people, or not groups, like individuals allowed in, probably on marked, they're probably using gaffer's tape to make, social distancing marks. If Sarah is involved with it, I know it's going to be a very, it's going to be very organized.
Very cool. So let's dive a little bit into the process that you use. So I want to break that down a little bit. What's the initiation point? Like what typically goes into the decision of like what animal you're going to make, if it's a skeletal piece, it's stuff like that.
That's getting really more and more complicated as time goes by, because I'm starting to make all kinds of different things. I don't know. It's like really, sometimes what you're going to make is unfortunately dictated by how much food you have in your cabinets, which I hate. I hate that. But this is how I make a living. I'm a scumbag. This is what I do. But, right now I'm just kind of making whatever I want. I really, really desperately right now want to make work that makes me laugh. I need that. I really need it. But, with the skeletons, with the osteological specimens, I would, just focus on a memory that has been popping up in my dreams or, more than usual because of countless external stimuli, reminding me of a person from my past or a moment. And I would try to find a specimen that is close to or related to an animal that I recall being present during the time when that thing happened in my life. Like a squirrel that ran through the yard when I was listening to these people have a conversation, or like the dog that was there when my parents had a fight, or those animals bear kind of a totemic significance for me. So that's where the animal sculptures come from.
And then once you've sort of had an idea for a piece, is that when you start drawing out sketches and planning out the composition of what it's going to look like?
Yeah, that's when I'll seek out, if I can. And I'm lucky I live in the northeastern United States where there's tons of museums at my fingertips. I can find a specimen of pretty much any animal, a skeletal specimen of pretty much any animal, pretty easily. And I'll do sketches. I'll try to observe it in person or find whatever the next best thing is and do a series of sketches from memory after observing it very, very closely.
Okay. And once you've sketched out the piece, how you want to go forward with it, do you typically dive right into crocheting, or are there like additional planning activities that you have to do? Like, I don't know, like a pattern diagram or something like that?
No, there's no pattern. I have some weird associations with numbers. My mother is really into numerology. I think it's fascinating because it's aligned with the pseudoscience that I, am fixated on. But I don't like. I'm not like, well, your persona number is a 7, so you probably shouldn't go out on Tuesday. Like I don't, I don't adhere to it in that way. But I think, very obsessed with numbers. I have some like color. I have some mild synesthesia going on, and I always have. So the numbers of stitches that I use to construct the sculptures typically will reflect the tone of the tone or the subject matter of the piece that I'm working with. Like,
oh wow,
yeah,
that's amazing.
That's a part of it, and it's sort of a pattern. Because you're working with multiples of certain numbers to generate volume at a ideal rate to construct, you don't want to, there's a ratio, there's a lot of math, but it's like weird intuitive math, if that makes any sense.
Okay. So, well, yeah, that's fascinating. And then the crocheting itself, how do you typically break that up? Like for the skeletal pieces in particular, do you do like one piece at a time, one like bone at a time? Or what's the approach?
It's individual bones. I don't draw like a diagram where I don't draw the specimen and then break it up into different bones, but I just visualize it broken up. Which further deviates it from its authentic source. And that brings it further along on that path of like the concentric circles of Platonic metaphysics, if I may be so bold to talk about a thing that I don't even fucking know much about. But like, it's deviating from that authentic, original utterance here. I love when things just get further and further and further away from the truth. And, breaking something down without even really having like a full scientific understanding of how this thing's body works is very fascinating. So I enjoy the process of crocheting the individual bones because of my ignorance.
Well, I mean, you know more about it than me at this point. I'm sure. So, at what point does the glue stiffening begin? Do you glue each of those pieces individually and then combine them all, or how does that usually work?
I will crochet the pieces individually, and then I dredge each one individually in a mixture of glues, and I lay them out on sheets of plastic or tinfoil or on the floor. I lay them out flat, sometimes with some wadded up plastic or tinfoil supporting it so that it creates like a ballooned out 3D form, which I can manipulate further as the glue is applied in further stages.
Okay, so it takes several applications in order to...
Oh, yeah. So many. So many.
And from what I understand, this isn't just any glue. Like, don't you make your own custom like glue concoction?
It's yeah, it just like comes out of my nose. It's like it just comes right out of my nose. It's amazing. No, I use some fabric stiffeners, some glues. Sometimes I use some starch. I've arrived at a formula that works pretty well, and it seems to be pretty archival, even though, I lay awake at night sweating and probably will for the rest of my life, that I'm going to get some like angry call from someone who's like, your piece fell apart and it's being eaten by maggots in the frame.
You just say that was part of the whole idea from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. It's a performance.
Exactly. And so how did you arrive at this formula? Was it just trial and error, or was it something you just sort of evolved over time?
Yeah, trial and error, just like mixing some mad scientist, Dr. Octagon, stuff like that. Yeah.
You could always make that into a product like McCormack's glue or something like that.
Yeah, I could do that. I could.
And so then as far as like assembling it, how do they all come together in the end? Like, do you stitch them all back together once they're all dried? And
yeah, I do like a Frankenstein stitch back. I stitch them all together, and then I apply glue to the whole thing, and I position it. One of my favorite things is that what further personalizes the piece is that I'll stitch all the pieces together, and it'll be, sometimes I suspend it on monofilament from like a piece of furniture so that it dries in a position or with a certain gesture that I'm trying to achieve. Or sometimes it's just laying there, and then I kind of like peel it back and I can manipulate it further with more glue. But sometimes when it's laying there in those initial glue stages, it responds to the ambient qualities of my studio. So if I have someone over visiting and the door, so you have to walk through my studio to get to the bathroom. If the door to the studio is opening more than usual, the creature will kind of sway to one side because of the wind generated by the door. So it's like, that this piece was made when, on Thanksgiving, because I've had Thanksgiving at my house a couple times. I don't know. I like that part. It's like a real weird nuance, but I appreciate it because it's totally out of my control.
Yeah, that's really cool. This whole process seems very organic, everything that's involved that you've sort of described. But it seems like it involves quite a lot of work. So, I mean, you must be clocking a ton of hours. What is your typical studio practice like?
It's just nonstop. I mean, I have some, sometimes I don't have anything going on, and I have like just, more time to be very miserable and feel, when I'm not working, I feel like my entire self-worth is based on my productivity and success as an artist. And, when I'm not working, it's like horrible. So I kind of have to do this. Otherwise, I'm both stifling my traumatic memories and not expressing them, and I'm like feeding into this like narcissistic impulse to create in order to validate my own existence.
One thing that you do quite often, which I absolutely love, is displaying your pieces in these old like antique clock cases. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Do you like have a lot of these? Did you have a lot of these around you as a kid, and like this is sort of another way of incorporating memories of your family into what you do, or is this brand new, like something that you just discovered like yourself?
There were a couple of them in my family. I think I used one but the rest of them just kind of remind me of those things. But those things are just so cool. You know, my grandfather made these wooden birds. I make my work in part, you know, to pay homage to his practice. And I think those clock cases, they're called gingerbread clock cases. I think they were another hobby kit-based practice that people's grandparents worked on in their wood shops. And I like to find ones from like Cincinnati suburbs and have it shipped here, or try to find one in, you know, at a New Jersey thrift store. It's like, I like to get materials that aren't related to me, but you know, I can easily envision the story behind it, and it kind of like creates this collective grandpa, I don't know, like a collective grandpa choral system that's helped to generate all of this weird craft-based art.
Okay. And once you picked out a case, what do you usually have to do to prepare it? Like, is there much work that goes into preparing it for your use?
Yeah. Sometimes you take it out of the box and it just disintegrates in your hands.
Wow.
You know, because they're old, and you know the easiest approach to it is, you know, it comes out of the box or you buy it and it like stays intact when you walk it home from the thrift store, and then you just paint it, you sand it down and paint it and make it look really nice. Get a new piece of glass cut for it. Or, you know, it just disintegrates in your hands, and I've had to like make like replicas of the molding around one part out of Sculpey that I like laboriously sand down and then attach and then paint with like a faux bois wood grain.
Oh, wow.
Or like texturize using sculpting tools. I some real sneaky, janky shit that I've had to do to, you know, make these things look good. But I just love them because a lot of them have at least 4 inches of working depth. And you can really do a lot in there. You can make multi-layered sculptural environments. It's really cool. It's like a little world.
Yeah, they look amazing. So something I've noticed, and you mentioned earlier, is you know, sort of an introduction to humor in your work, or a reintroduction, because I think there was humor in your work back, especially in like the 3D illustration work you did.
Yeah.
You definitely see that in the DNA of what you've done over the years. And you mentioned earlier desire to get more humor into your work. You have, you know, tablecloth of penises and like undulating porn VHS tapes. You know, what's motivated this desire to inject more humor into your work?
It has just been a part of me my whole life. Like I don't know. I think I found myself becoming consumed by this like memento mori message and aesthetic, and I forgot that you can use this to communicate humor. And I don't feel like myself. I don't feel like I am really expressing my thoughts without at least having the option to make something that's like sarcastic or ridiculous. It's just so much more fulfilling for me to do that.
Okay, and do you think that that'll result, you know, moving into more humorous work? Do you think that'll result in you moving away from some of the skeletal motifs, or do you think that'll always be an aspect of what you do?
I think it'll always be an aspect to some extent, because I think for humor to register, you need to have some dark stuff. I think that humor isn't like, it needs to be emphasized by something that is a stark contrast. And I also think that like the funniest things are jokes that present themselves as like authoritative specimens, or like something that should be taken seriously, you know? So even if it doesn't even communicate successfully and it's just a joke for me, I don't know, I get a lot from that.
So another way that I've seen your work evolve in recent years is you incorporating more color into it. And, you know, most of the work you've had throughout your career, especially with the osteological specimens, has been more in the black and white realm. But more recently, you've also started incorporating, you know, plant-based colors, stuff like that. What prompted that transition into more colorful work?
I was thinking a lot about, I think I was just missing the woods, and I was thinking about my childhood in like more of an environmental sense and less of a personal, less of a fixation on like my body. And I don't know, it just clicked. I was like, why have I not been making leaves and mushrooms and vines? They're so much fun to make. I love occasionally using natural pigments to dye the fibers. If I can't get a plant color right, I don't know why I wasn't doing it. It was, another symptom of the like seriousness that I felt like I had to instill in my work. Not that plants aren't serious, but they're more chaotic and lively. And I don't know. I felt like I was missing out all this time for not doing that. And it's way more fun for me to work with some color elements.
So when you're working on a piece that's going to have color, how early in the process do you tend to lock down your palette? I mean, I have to imagine it's like by necessity, it has to be super early on just to make sure you have all the threads that you need.
Yeah, I'll do, I'll take threads from my thread box, which is actually my grandmother's embroidery thread box. The fun fact is that the darkest bright, like the most blood red. So she numbered all of her little embroidery thread card things, and the most blood red colors number is 666. My grandmother was this like intensely Catholic little Italian lady, and I don't know if that was intentional, but it was very, very cool to find that. But yeah, I used her embroidery threads, which she like painstakingly organized, and I have completely destroyed any semblance of organization of, and I'll make some color palette combos, and I'll take pictures of them with my phone, or I'll even just like use colored pencils to make color palettes and try to match the colors. I really get a lot of pleasure from matching colors with embroidery thread, using, finding color palettes from like a film still that I like and matching the colors. It's like a weird, sick pleasure that I get from that.
Well, and when you don't have the threads, you mentioned earlier, do you custom dye some yourself?
Yeah, I'll use some natural pigment dyes, and yeah, sometimes I'll collect things from the woods and use that.
Well, and in that same vein of color matching, I know you recently collaborated with Michelle Konchik.
Yeah.
How did that collab come together? Like, was that your idea, her idea? Did y'all just chat about it? How did that?
Yeah, we just kind of talked about it. I don't know. I don't really remember who proposed the idea, but we're good friends. I like her a lot. I think she's a really cool person. Yeah, I'm actually looking at the piece right now. It just kind of, it's been on hold for a while. It hasn't been really a good time to reveal this piece that we made. But yeah, that was like one of the first major color matching enterprises. And that was very fun. But yeah, I really like her color palette, because there's a lot of earth tones, a lot of deep deciduous forest, rhizosphere kind of colors, muted, brick reds and sage greens. Those are the colors of my childhood. So
okay. And do you like collaborations in general? Is it something you'd like to do more of?
Yeah, I do. I did a big collaboration in at the Philadelphia Sculpture Gym years ago with a poet named Kerwin Sutherland, where he wrote some poems, and I created these sculptures to kind of illustrate the different stages of this like poem cycle that he had done. And that was like the first really intense collaboration I ever did, and it was cool. It's an intense process to work with someone, and you're both making this thing, you're both making things, and then you're trying to balance like communicating effectively to create something that can belong to both of you. And it's more work. And I'm not good at communicating with people, and I'm not good at being around people or like handling interaction at all. I'm not good at any of that. So like, I guess collaboration is like insanely stressful for me, but I also get a lot from it. I like it.
Okay, very cool. So let's talk a little bit about what you have coming up. Are there any upcoming shows that you're participating in this year?
So I right now am in a show at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which has had its closing extended to August 30th, I think, and it's called Here and Now. It's a survey of new contemporary art. It's curated by Ken Harmon from Hashimoto Contemporary and Joseph Zimmerman, who works at the Fort Wayne Museum, and they're both really, really, really nice, cool people. And I cannot believe that they put me in that show because it has like some of my favorite artists of all. It has, yeah. You should check the show out. It's amazing. They should not have put me in it. I don't belong there. I'm so inferior to everyone there. And I have I have a show with Allison Summers at Talon Gallery in December. I don't even know if I'm supposed to talk about it yet publicly, but I am really excited about that because Allison is awesome and a really cool person. And I'm not sure if we're, going to be there for it, if it's going to be, a thing that can happen.
So is that a like a 2-person show?
Yeah. It's a 2-person show. I mean, I've been in 2-person shows at Antler before, and Talon's owned by the same people. And I've been in ones that are 2 solo shows in the same room that are kind of like in communication with one another, in dialogue with one another. And I've been in ones that are a 2-person show. So I'm not quite sure what their approach is going to be, but I'm cool with it being a 2-person show because I feel like, Allison and I have similar aesthetic proclivities.
Yeah, that's amazing. So where can people find you online?
I have a website. It's CaitlynTMcCormack.com. It's a functioning website. I'm on Instagram. I'm Mr._Caitlyn, but I think I might change my Instagram name eventually.
Where did that come from anyway? Where did the Mr. Caitlyn come from?
My friend April calls me Mr. Caitlyn. And this was in like 2012 that I decided, no, it wasn't 2012. It must have been later. But I just never changed it. But I should because it's, like more so the Instagram name of like a 24-year-old and not a adult person. Right now on Instagram, I'm trying to just, fundraise and I'm, trying to contribute to the art community in a way that doesn't really focus on me, right now.
Yeah, I've seen the recent fundraiser you've done. That's amazing stuff.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's not about me. I feel very fortunate that most of the people in my life and in my community are engaging in, efforts that are very genuine to hopefully change the way the art world is managed. Because it's, I don't need to say I'm not educated enough or articulate enough to be the person to speak about this, but I know that I can help. So
it's a very good way to look at it. I appreciate that. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
I mean, do they have to be alive?
No, I mean, I guess that's sort of built into the question.
Okay. Yeah. Like, so this is a practical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Man, an artist that I would like to see you have on the show. I really love Tia Roche's work. She's amazing. She's so cool. She actually has a raffle going on right now. She's an illustrator in Philly, and she is super, super cool and is really like blown up her illustration approach in the past like couple years. Her Instagram is Dreamy Guts. She's super, super cool. She's awesome. I think I just shared her work in a story that I posted today on Instagram story. But yeah, I would really, she's really into horror. Has like encyclopedic knowledge of horror movies and would be like a really amazing person to talk to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Kate, I think you're amazing, and I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Caitlin. I found it so fascinating what she had to say about memory and the presence of memory in the work that she makes, both in terms of the actual themes for her shows and pieces themselves, but it's also a big component of her process as well. The way she'll go and view osteological specimens in person and really focus in on the details, but then most of her sketching is done later, intentionally drawing from her own memory in order to reflect the mutability and fragility of memory, and how passing it through that filter of her own recollection inherently changes it. I just think that's brilliant. And I think it's pretty awesome that she's wanting to inject more humor into what she's doing. You can definitely see the presence of humor in the early 3D illustration work that she made, but less so once she moved into the crochet pieces. And maybe that's partly because that was born out of mourning and grief, and that wasn't the right place or the right time. It's hard to say. But the move into more humorous waters definitely seems like a very natural thing and completely organic. I'm really excited to see what her and Allison bring to Talon Gallery in December. Definitely keep an eye out for news on that as it becomes available. And there's one more thing I'd like to touch on, and then I promise I'll close this thing out. I fear I may be getting a bit too long-winded at the end of these things. But there's one thing that I really wish that I had said to Caitlin during our chat, so I'll go ahead and say it here at the end. When she was talking about her tendency towards doubting herself and how when she's accomplished something she was striving for, she sort of dismissed it as not being significant because, they may have lowered the bar or whatever. And I didn't really press on that because, honestly, self-doubt is something that I can relate to myself. It's something I've struggled with for most of my life and still struggle with today. So, I didn't question it because I understood it, But what I do wish that I had said is that, for what it's worth, and, maybe it's not worth much because, who am I? But for what it's worth, I think her work is amazing. And I know there are thousands upon thousands of people all across the world who also think her work is amazing. And that's an incredible thing, making work that thousands of people like that is a remarkable thing. So I hope she's able to at least take a little bit of pride in that. She definitely deserves it. So thanks again to Caitlin for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. If you happen to have Apple Podcasts, rating and reviewing the show there is actually a huge help. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairespodcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.